Thank you very much, Dan. And thank you to all of you guys who have stuck around to the very bitter end. We're going to hopefully make this very interesting, which I don't think will be hard, given that the discussion on the last panel was already very intense. And I'm hoping to pick up right there. So what we're going to be discussing in this panel is the evolution of the 5G spectrum roadmaps towards 5G advanced, 6G, and the next generation of connectivity. So what our panel will be sort of starting off with is the progress that we have seen since WRC 23 and the bands that were allocated to be used for 5G services. And we will then be discussing the work towards development of spectrum roadmaps for 5G advanced and 6G, as I was saying before, and sort of have a discussion on the different ways forward. So without further ado, I will introduce our panel and then hand over to our first member. So we have Eric Fournier, who is the Director for Spectrum Planning and International Affairs at ANFR. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon or good evening. It's always difficult to be in the last session, but thanks to Forum Europe for this opportunity to speak about the next spectrum roadmap. Very rapidly, speaking about 5G advance, there was already a clear conclusion within RSPG that there's no real need for additional harmonized frequency band. That's not preventing individual member states to provide some additional spectrum. In France, for example, we are intending to authorize the L-band, so 90 megahertz additional for the operators. That's not preventing also to have this new harmonization measures, which will be adopted probably in March on the 3842 gigahertz for the local low-medium power coverage, and that's something which is very important. In France, we have already made part of the spectrum available for verticals, 5G vertical, for the same kind of local coverage, and that will be enlarged in few months. So what we are really speaking about spectrum roadmap for 6G, as explained by the RSPG chair this morning. There's a report on 6G strategic visions, which will be adopted very soon. There was already a public consultations and a lot of response, 35 response, with a general support for the need to have a spectrum roadmap for 6G. That's very clear. You need to explain how you will launch 6G. There's a big push for harmonizations and to build an ecosystem around 6G. And also a strong interest for new mid-band spectrum, and that was some discussion already today, and also a call for a lower frequency band. That's clear. That was appearing in the response. So this 6G spectrum roadmap, it's not yet clear when it will be adopted by RSPG, maybe 2026, but that's up to RSPG to decide. And just to know that there's already a first version of the 6G roadmap from CPT, and that's already taking care of specific elements, including NTN, including verticals, and all that. So the main message of my presentation will be very clear that the upper 6 GHz should be part of this 6G spectrum roadmap. For me, that's very clear. It's already more or less in the EU mandate on the 6 GHz, which is making clear that part of this is for 6G in shared use or split band option. And the RSPG opinion on 6 GHz will provide the compromise which is proposed on this 6 GHz big debate within Europe, and that will be in public consultation in June. I have to speak about the agenda item 17 of WRC 27 because that's mentioned in many presentations, and I just have to say there's no response in this WRC 27 agenda item 17 for new spectrum for 6G in Europe. There's 3 frequency range which are under study at WRC 27. 2, 4448 and 15 GHz are used very intensively by defense systems. It's not something which is just in small rural areas where you have military people training. No, it's used worldwide in ships, in aircraft, that can be used at any time, any place. And it's very similar in both frequency band in what was studied by WRC 23 and also WRC 15 and 19. Concerning the frequency band 4.8, 499 was the same kind of equipment, and the response at WRC 23 was to say, well, you will have to protect this kind of usage with very stringent PFD limits, which are making the deployment of this system for those countries having to apply this PFD limit very difficult. Also, the 7 gigahertz, which is probably the most important or the one attracting the more attention. This is the NATO band for core satellite communication. So it is used by many systems, many platforms. It can be used anytime, anywhere. We had the Olympic game in Paris in summertime, and we shared a lot of frequency band with defense to have a wireless camera and wireless microphone, not this frequency band. It was impossible to use that because it was intensively deployed, including in Paris. So in that frequency band, there are also the scientific receiving earth station. So a lot of startups in all countries making some observations, business, are using this frequency band. In all countries in Europe, I think you have startups, satellite startup in all frequency, in all country in Europe, and they are using this frequency band. So there's only the lower part where there's some up that maybe something will be harmonized at WRC 27 for IMT with possibility to use in Europe. So only one solution for the spectrum roadmap is the upper 6 gigahertz, because there's expected need for a new mid-band for 6G. We're speaking about this immersive communication. There was a debate in the previous session, this request for 200 megahertz bandwidth per operators, the need to have a new primary band like for 5G with 2.5 gigahertz to help launching the technology. And we can see in the world all this fight for finding a new mid-band spectrum for 5G. 1.7 will not provide solutions. So 6 gigahertz, which is already well harmonized within ITU, which is attracting a lot of interest in region 1, in region 2, in region 3, that's a frequency band which will be available for the spectrum roadmap. So having said that, we will have this 6G spectrum roadmap, which will be discussed starting probably in a few months within our SPG. We'll take into consideration the work of CPT, this relative spectrum need of 6G and Wi-Fi. We are really working on that. What is the spectrum need for 6G and for Wi-Fi? That will also include elements like the NTN, the satellite element, also, of course, the need for verticals. And we hope, and I hope, that this will be the deadline. We will have a 6G spectrum roadmap for our SPG, from our SPG side in 2026. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. I'll hand over to Gerasimos Sofianatos, who's the head of unit at the Radio Spectrum Policy within the European Commission.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure I will be able to be so timely, finish on time like Eric did, but I will do my best. First of all, good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this panel, where I expect to have a lot of debate. On the roadmaps, I think before we speak about any need for a roadmap for 5G advanced and 6G, we need to take a step back and see what was how we did with the 5G roadmap. And overall, we think and that there is a broad consensus that the 5G roadmap worked very well, and it was in general a success story. It was not a one-stop and one-shot, let's say, process. And many of the colleagues here who have been involved for its development will say that its success, it's also due to the fact that it was exactly developed and was in a position to be to evolve during its lifetime. We started with the 3 pioneer bands, and I think this was very well explained by Jonas in the previous intervention, that this was a bit of a a good, let's say, circumstance that we had a spectrum which was sitting idle and could be used and was freed both in low band and mid band. We also did a tremendous work, I think, with the help of CEPT and RSC to make all the bands which are available for electronic communication services ready for 5G. And the evolving, let's say, part came with the addition of the 3.8 and the 4.2 gigahertz band, which is addressing the request of the verticals, and it gives a lot more capacity in the mid band for private networks. And of course, the 42 gigahertz band, which was added to the 26 gigahertz band, which was the initial millimeter wave. But we heard also earlier what are the difficulties we have with the economics of deploying networks in such a high band. So overall, successful in terms of intention and delivery, but where we are in terms of deployment. In terms of deployment, we see that we didn't do that bad, but we didn't do also that well either, in the sense that we have deployed the 700 megahertz band. The 3.6 gigahertz band is assigned, but where are we in terms of deployment? Assigned at 93%, but deployment a little bit more than 50%. Still, a lot of work needs to be done to develop networks in the 3.6 gigahertz band, which shows that spectrum availability is not the only condition to have network deployment. For 5G Advanced, I will not go more. I think Eric covered it very well, that RSPG is clear that we don't need, at least for the 5G Advanced, new spectrum. What we need, however, is 5G Advanced to come. We need the 5G standalone networks to be deployed. We need the enhanced capabilities that they can offer. These are, to a certain extent, what we were promised 10 years ago for 5G, and it seems to me like that what we expect from the 5G Advanced is what 10 years ago we thought 5G would bring. So spectrum roadmap for 6G. Yes, we need a spectrum roadmap for 6G, and we need to learn, and we need to exploit the learnings that we have from 5G, avoid the pitfalls in terms of fragmentation as regards the speed, as regards the availability of the bands. And of course, we need the spectrum roadmap for 6G because we need to also send a clear message to the market that 6G will be coming, and it will need, as 5G needed, it will need a dedicated band to be able to be launched at the same time throughout the EU. Of course, there will be a need to reuse spectrum from mid bands, from low bands, as it was mentioned before. The bands, it was said, they are assigned in a technology-neutral manner, and operators are free to make their choices about what is the best economical way to deploy the bands. But if we want a technology to be available everywhere at the same time, we need to send a signal about the availability of the spectrum. The report that many have praised in this conference, and I will join them in saying that it's a very good report. The RSPG report on the 6G vision has two, let's say, main points which I would like to repeat. It says that we need to take into account the early signals of demand for additional spectrum, and to make spectrum timely available for 6G use cases. As regards let's say the upper 6 gigahertz band, there was a lot of discussion. I expect that it will be raised also in our panel. There, I think the technical work has started. The Commission adopted the mandate on this. The CEPT will be now working in the next period of time intensively to develop the different scenarios. We need to, of course, wait and give the technical work the chance to develop. As Jonas said, we need to give the chance to sharing, to the possibility of sharing that we have been discussing for many years. But at one point in time, we also need to take a decision, and we will need to see what is the, let's say, what are the socioeconomic benefits of the deployment in each technology, and take a sovereign decision, as was exactly our pursuit, our objective in the last WRC 23, to allow the Union to take a sovereign decision on this issue. Now, we cannot speak about spectrum roadmap for 6G if we do not touch upon WRC 27. Hopefully, I will not repeat what very well Eric said, but I will just stick I will just want to highlight 2 points in particular, because I'm running over time. First of all, that, as it was said, the situation is not as simple as it was 10 years ago for the 5G. There are also other Union policies, defense, common security and defense policy. There is Earth observation, and we need to make a very cautious approach when we are speaking about coexistence and sharing between those services. Of course, WRC will study this. We need to also give the space to this, to the studies to be conducted, and to see exactly what is the potential of sharing between the different services. From our side, we will be the process has been launched. We will have this year the RSPG in the interim opinion, and then which will set the agenda, which is relevant. Let's say which agenda items are relevant for the Union. And at the end of the year, we will have the workshop with the CEPT, where the stakeholders will be able to also express their views. And next year will be the time where we will be drafting the decision. It's going to be, let's say, a process which will allow all stakeholders to give their point of view in order to have, in the end, a balanced approach. Of course, I mean, the starting point will be the decision, the Council decision that was adopted for WRC 23, but still, this is a new process that is starting now. Thank you very much, and sorry for being a bit over time.
Thank you very much. And with that, we'll hand over to Gerard Elzinga. I tried. Who's the digital capabilities branch head for NATO digital staff.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and anyone who doesn't identify as either one of them, good afternoon. I'm Gerard Elzinga. I work at NATO headquarters as branch head of digital capabilities. One of the responsibilities of that branch is Spectrum. Now, I have to make a disclaimer. I am a NATO official, I know, but I can only express NATO positions if they are agreed by all 32 nations. So here I will express a NATO staff opinion that is well informed by national interests. Just to be clear. Before I go into detail on the IMT bands that are under discussion here, the 3842, 4448, and the, what is it, 148, 1535, 725, or 7125, 284, and 4448. Just want to take a step back. I think it's clear to everyone now that with the war against Ukraine, that access to the radio frequency spectrum for the military is of absolute necessity in order to be able to conduct operations. What we're seeing there in the spectrum domain is a lot of disruption, electronic warfare, jamming. I mean, we're not talking an occasional interference here. We're talking day-to-day jamming 24/7 of satellite systems, of navigation systems, of your ground-to-ground communications and everything. So I think it is clear that we need access. Now, within NATO, that is well recognized. Within the military, definitely. Without access to the radio frequency spectrum, we cannot do our job. What is now the situation? That over the course of the years, definitely since 1989, for those who remember the fall of the Berlin Wall, I see some faces that probably it was in their youth or even not even consciously that they had it. But those with the gray hair will definitely recognize it. After that, defense spending went down, and significantly down. I mean, NATO had this 2% rule, 2% of your GDP was supposed to be spent on defense, which is in fact an insurance, like you have your fire insurance for your house. We saw the same thing happening with access to spectrum. Over the course of the years, the military got less and less access to spectrum. And we are very well aware there's no exclusive military spectrum. We know that. And we are allowed by the internationally agreed radio regulations that we are just a user, as there are many other users who compete all for that same spectrum. Now, over the course of the years, there is a traditionally used spectrum, and the bottom line is we are now in a situation where, similar as with defense spending, that is going up now, we prefer to have even more access to spectrum. Now, the amount, difficult to say, will always be situationally dependent. But as a minimum, at least keep access to that part of the spectrum that we have. Now, with that, 5G, 6G, we generally refer to it as a next generation networks. For us, it's both a blessing and a curse. I mean, that's clear. I mean, there's no way around it. The military will use 5G in the future, 6G, next generation, future G, whatever name you give it. And it is definitely a part of our roadmaps to include it in our so-called digital backbone. We have embarked on they call it a journey, I like the word, but it's just a word. It will constantly evolve, and we call that journey digital transformation. Why do we go on that? Well, we need to approach, let's say, the way we do operations way differently than we did in the past. And in the past, let's say the period 1990 to 2015, where our focus was on expeditionary operations, ISAF, the Balkans, Iraq. That's a completely different situation than what we will face in the future. And this is not a doom story or anything, but that's just the reality. And our operations need to be completely differently organized, more data-centric. Our decisions need to be made within the decision cycles of enemies, adversaries. And for that, we need to go to a so-called digital transformation. By the way, we refer to that as multi-domain operations, in case you run across that term. So 5G, next G, future G will become an integral part of our digital backbone. We are already clear on that one. But it's also a curse. And why? Because IMT, of course, needs resources, needs access to spectrum in order to be able to be implemented. Now, to implement and to shape NATO's use of 5G, we've developed a NATO vision and 5G, NATO 5G next generation networks vision and strategy that has a number of topics, technology watch, technology integration. So basically look what is out there, which direction is it going, and what is especially useful for the military. Second one, interoperability, standardization and testing. We're planning to develop a 5G standard for the military, for NATO, as a profile based on what the 3GPP is doing. Security, of course, aspects, security specifications in the 5G standard. That is one thing that we're interested in, but also vendors. They need to be trusted. We're developing a trusted vendor policy in order to, let's say, eradicate the weed among the good vendors. Partnerships with academia, industry, non-NATO nations. Why? In order to build up a certain critical mass towards all those international communities that have a role to play in 5G, in the spectrum allocations and whatnot. And for this, in the spectrum domain, in order to prepare for the World Radio Communication Conference 27, NATO positions are developed. But as NATO doesn't have a voice there, the NATO nations agree NATO positions on specific agenda items in order to defend in front of, let's say, the ITU, the entire world, and to bring that forward. Now, Eric already gave a perfect explanation on the position of these various bands. So in general, NATO, and this is a preliminary position that is already agreed by all NATO nations, but it's preliminary because we're not there yet at the WRC 27. So it may change based on whatever consideration there may be out there. But we, as NATO, oppose effectively an allocation in those bands to IMT. Why? Because our operations will suffer and suffer badly from those allocations. We can't do our job if those allocations go through or are severely hampered. And in some of these bands, we are already hampered. And it's not like also in the past that when an allocation is made and the decision is made, that we all of a sudden we lose the entire band. It doesn't work that way. It's generally chipping off at the edges where it starts, and then at some point you just don't have access anymore or a different status. So we're really very concerned about this discussion, because if this is accepted, then the military will suffer, and with that we will also be more limited in our ability to provide that what we were meant to be for, and that is security for the 1 billion inhabitants of the population of, let's say, NATO. And I think we should see this as a, let's say, access to the spectrum, specifically also this spectrum, is simply needed in order for us to, it's a resource, and for this resource is necessary for the military to do their job. So a plea to take that perspective into account whenever you engage in discussions on this specific topic. And I know I didn't touch on a roadmap, but as a next step, a follow-up of the strategy, we are developing a roadmap, but that is more of the implementation of 5G into NATO. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So after an interesting military perspective on this, I'm handing over to the industry. So Erika Tejedor, who's the Vice President for Spectrum Regulations at Ericsson.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to see some people in the room at least. I was a bit worried. So let me start by, before I go into the controversy, let me start by a slide that I think the whole conference actually agreed upon. I was preparing this slide last week, and then when I was listening to all the speakers and all the discussions yesterday and today, then I realized, okay, maybe I got this actually right. So I try to put everything into perspective. How do we achieve a sustainable, inclusive, and competitive Europe? That's where we want to get, right? That's the ultimate goal. This is where we want Europe to be. But for that, it's a quite big goal, and we need to break it down. So I try to break it down into a pyramid. And if you look at the pyramid, if we want to really reach a sustainable, inclusive, and competitive Europe, which one is on one of the main building blocks? Is actually the mobile networks. Of course, there are many different perspectives that we need to work on, as it was discussed throughout yesterday and today. We need to work on incentivized investment. We need to work on innovation. We need to work also on trust, because these technologies need to come to the picture, right? So people need to trust that they are going to be implemented. And if we go lower on the chain, then what do we want to do to, just to incentivize all these investments, to enable innovation? We need to work on the really low-level details. And one of the building blocks, as somebody said yesterday, is spectrum. You can look at the spectrum, of course, from different perspectives. You can look at spectrum licensing if you are looking at the spectrum deployments, or you can look at future spectrum. That's what we are talking about today. Now, I also want to look a little bit at the evolution of the generations, the mobile generations. And why I want to have this is because I see that Europe is looking a lot into the launch of 6G. And there will be a launch of 6G, but that's not the end of 6G. If we look at the history, each generation lasts for about 10 years. And when we launch a technology, and that we have seen from previous generations, we have a basic kind of use cases, and they evolve. So we have to think about the launch of 6G, but we also need to think about the full-scale 6G. And now we are talking about 2030 to 2040, more or less. I think Europe needs to be prepared if we want to improve competitiveness, if the way is to regain leadership that we had once upon a time in previous years. Europe, we need to remember, Europe was leading at some point. We lost it, but we can get there again. And as a European-born company, we really hope that we regain that, that we regain at least that leadership. Now let's look at spectrum. And I heard both from the Commission and from ANFR, I heard that there is no new spectrum that is needed until the 6G era. And that really depends. I mean, spectrum needs depend on use cases, right? We can call it 5G, we can call it 6G, it doesn't matter. It's about use cases at the end of the day. So today we have public networks and we have industries. That's what 5G is about. That's the main, that's all the main use cases. We have seen that we have introduced a lot of fixed wireless access. There has been a lot of growth in Europe with fixed wireless access. We also have a lot of improvement in the industries, especially with robotic communication. Now, where do we go from here? Well, towards 2030, I know there is a lot of discrepancy. Is there gonna be more capacity in it or not? And it's difficult. We don't have a crystal ball, any of us. So it depends. It depends on the ecosystem growth. But we, as a technology leader, think that if you look at market trends, one of the things that is coming to the picture for real is extended reality. Today, extended reality, it's localized. And now the question is, do we want to keep it really localized? Or do you want to enable the gains everywhere? I'm talking about the gains from a public safety perspective, for example, that is being used outdoors. It's not only about gaming. I mean, XR is not just to play inside home. It's much more than that. It can help health. It can help communication. So it can help a lot of the sectors. But if we want to get there, it's not going to be enough with the spectrum that the mobile operators have today. So if we don't have more spectrum by 2030, then our take is that Europe will actually be a little bit more behind than what we are there right now in the race to 6G. So really additional spectrum, and in particular wide area spectrum, that's going to be needed to enable use cases. That's it. That's a matter 5G or 6G, just to enable new use cases. When we look beyond 2030, our vision is not only to have extended reality. We have to move from there. I mean, we are thinking about our horizon up to 2040. So we see that we will have advanced XR. We will also have digital twins that will also improve to create a copy of the real world into digital world. We will have a lot of new usage. Now it sounds very futuristic, but we also thought that robotic communication was very futuristic when we started to talk about it. Not so many people believed on it, but now it's a reality. So how do we get there? How do we enable all these new use cases? We see that there is a need for licensed full power wide area spectrum in Europe. And we have some recommendations for Europe, how we should look at this. We have the upper 6 gigahertz that was also mentioned before, and there is great work ongoing in CEPT and the RSPG. The RSPG is also doing a lot of hard work on the upper 6. It's gonna be a really important band to enable traffic growth, new use cases. That includes 5G advanced, 6G, whatever, depending when they come. And it's a really important band, and it's, as Eric also said, it's the band that is in the near term, the possibility for the launch of 6G. So we would really like Europe to finalize the harmonization of this band to enable full power macro deployments. Then we go to the 7 to 8.4 gigahertz that is being considered for WRC 27. We have heard concerns from NATO, which we have noted and we are working on. We understand how important this band is for military usage, not only in Europe, as it was also mentioned. This is not a European thing, it's not only a NATO thing. Even also countries outside NATO, they need to use the ecosystem as well. So we do understand that. The only thing we ask Europe is that, yes, these bands should actually be considered in the 6G roadmap. Please give time to the industry to look at solutions. As it was explained also in the previous panel by PTS, by Jonas, we can also look at sharing solutions. This is something that at least the industry, we are always being asked to innovate. There is no better chance to give us to innovate than looking for possibilities to share. But at least we should be given the chance to look at solutions. And last but not least, and I think this has also been mentioned in previous panels, is to bring connectivity to those that are not connected, or maybe that are connected but actually may become, may get a bigger digital gap if we are giving more spectrum to those in urban areas, but we don't bring the same to rural areas, then the digital divide will actually increase. We have to be a bit careful with that. We don't want to do that in Europe. So for that, it's the low band spectrum. We have the recommendation that in the 6G roadmap, the sub-UHF spectrum should be considered. It's also a very difficult band because we know that it's very differently used in Europe, but it's something that definitely Europe should look into. Look at the trends and see if there is any possibility farther than 2030 to be able to use it for either mobile broadcast, depending on what its nation needs. And with that, I thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you very much, Erica. And last but not least, we'll hand over to Stuart Cook, who's a Senior Director for Future Spectrum at the GSMA.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. The good news is I'm the last presenter. I understand there was a discussion earlier on about traffic growth. So at the GSMA, we believe that the traffic growth, the rate of growth, will be around 20% globally by the end of this decade. So what that means in terms of the actual traffic that the mobile networks need to carry, that continues to increase at quite a rate. And so in some parts of the world, in some of the networks, we're already beginning to see a capacity crunch outside of Europe. And we expect within Europe, some of the operators are already predicting a capacity crunch towards the end of this decade. So as well as needing new spectrum to accommodate that ongoing capacity into the next decade, we also are recommending new spectrum to support the wider band services and applications. Given the time, I wanted to focus on one particular topic, and that's spectrum for 6G. So can we look back in order to look forward? What is the channel bandwidth in these mid-band ranges? What is needed for 6G? It's very clear that 6G will need to be designed from the outset to reuse the existing spectrum. But in terms of that new additional spectrum, what might those future channel bandwidths be? If we look at 3G, 4G, and 5G, there was a 4 to 5 times increase in the channel bandwidths, 5 megahertz, 20, 100 megahertz with 5G. So what might that mean for 6G? It's becoming clear within the industry that 200 megahertz channels at least will be the basis for 6G in this mid-band range. There are discussions whether that might be extended up to 400 megahertz or whether it might be an aggregation of 2 by 200 megahertz, for example. And so when we build that long-term roadmap to support that ongoing growth and also those additional services, let's plan from the outset to enable the option for 6G, because we know that spectrum is a long-term plan, a long-term challenge. So let's build in the capability, the option for 6G from the outset. This is a very high-level, simple diagram. I would love to be able to talk about the low bands, the 3.5 gigahertz, but let's focus on the 6 and 7 gigahertz. I don't think a presentation would be complete without talking about 6 gigahertz, right? It's clear that 6 gigahertz is a really important band to enable the option for those wide 200 megahertz high power carriers. We have the WRC 23 results. That's the bright red, the upper 6 for IMT to enable the option for 5G Advanced and 6G in the future. And as we've heard, the World Radio Conference in 27, that darker red at the top from 7.1 to 8.4 spectrum, or parts of the spectrum from within that band. Is it possible for 6G to be deployed and designed to operate in that band? Of course, it depends on the existing users. Is sharing possible in the 7.1 to 8.4 or parts of that band? Can operators perhaps use parts of that spectrum in cities in peacetime? Perhaps military sharing, enable operators to share that spectrum in the cities. There are sorts of options that we could think about to enable the option for sharing. If we look at specifics for Europe and a potential approach to find those 200 megahertz high power quality of service channels, the upper 6, I think you can detect from the panel even here, is probably the only option for those wideband channels in Europe. So if we're going to have a long-term roadmap to enable the option for 6G, ultimately the operators will decide, is it 5G Advanced, is it 6G? But planning to enable the option for 6G, it seems clear that the upper 6 is the main game in town in terms of that spectrum roadmap. And so whether it's 7125 or that gets extended into 7250 depends on the outcome of the World Radio Conference in 27. Depends how many operators there are in a country, but let's plan the 200 megahertz type channels, high power, quality of service. For the second longer term phase, we completely respect the concerns of the military. It's really very important politically at the moment that we have a plan for military communications. But is there an opportunity to develop a solution which enables future 6G to be used in this band or parts of this band, where we can look at sharing between commercial and military solutions? It's perhaps a little premature to say no right now when we haven't even considered how we might design the technology to use the upper, the 7.1 to 7.7 or 8.4. So the long-term roadmap for 6G, phase 1, very clear. Let's plan the upper 6 to enable the option for 6G, high power, quality of service for those wider band applications. And in addition, let's design 6G to reuse what we have as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stuart. And I think we'll just pick up right where you and Erica left off. So trying to, energize the room for this last session. So diving straight in, sharing in the 4.4 to 4.8 in the 7 or the 14.8 to 15.35 gigahertz band. Is that a possibility? Is there a potential for more efficient use within some of the band to make it free for some mobile use, or is that absolutely, in your opinion, a no-go? Either, Gerard or Gerasimos. Should work.
Well, as the current NATO position is, and it's a preliminary position, we oppose any other allocation in that band. It is right on top of critical military bands. We need the access to those bands, and as I tried to explain, we have already lost a lot of spectrum over the past. Not only that parts of the spectrum were completely cut off, we couldn't use them anymore, or through sharing arrangements. But this is not a good solution for us in these bands, because here we will lose parts of those bands which will immediately impact on our ability to conduct operations. And as I already explained, I mean, the current war against Ukraine clearly shows that access to spectrum is a decisive factor in the outcome of any conflict nowadays, much more than it used to be, because more and more systems are dependent on the spectrum in order to operate. We don't have a very static situation anymore, like in the past where a lot was done over wires, but now more and more is done wireless because it gives you a lot of flexibility, but it introduces also a lot of, let's say, vulnerabilities. And we definitely need access to these parts of the spectrum. So we would really not be, or we would be opposing any sharing or whatever. Does it mean we will not pursue any more efficient use of the spectrum? Sure, we will do that. We are still working on dynamic spectrum management. We are working on more efficient waveforms, all those things. But at the moment, as it stands, we cannot give anything of it up.
I think that's a very interesting point. I think also one that we haven't heard so far, the fact that military might also just need more spectrum, because I think so far we've talked about using more of the military spectrum. Erica, any chance that the mobile operators might be able to take a different approach to sort of how they use the frequency bands or develop sharing?
Yeah, I think, so I was listening to Gerard and I hear it doesn't work, there is interference, we need the spectrum. I don't think neither GSMA nor us, Ericsson, have said that we are going to take over the spectrum. We won't take over the spectrum. I mean, we are not going to fight against NATO, that's clear. But I think from our perspective, we are also citizens, first of all. So Ericsson, you know, we have people and we are also citizens. So we also want to be protected in case of war, that's clear. But I think we are actually looking at a new generation. And I think we are looking at things a little bit differently from previous generations. So in previous generations, we are used to the process of we do sharing studies, we put some technical conditions, does it work, does it not work? Maybe we actually relocate some of the services, but now we are looking at it from a different perspective. We have understood that, you know, we can get more access to a spectrum and move users. We have understood that. It's a scarce resource and we are fighting for it from different services. I mean, even across technologies, right? If you look at the upper six, then we are fighting, the mobile industry is fighting. That includes Wi-Fi and IMT. So we won't take over the 7 to 8 gigahertz of spectrum, that's for sure. The question is, can we find a sharing solution that enables mobile operator to have, you know, to incentivize investments, to actually have macro base stations at the same time as militaries can still use it when they need it, where they need it. I understand it's a difficult one because you have all sort of users on the move, which makes things kind of complicated. And I think Eric had it in his slides, anywhere, anytime. I think that's a good definition of the band.
Please, yes.
If I may, yes, on this anywhere, anytime. And that's a difficulty we face for the Paris Olympic game. You could easily imagine, normally with the same logic, that you can have wireless camera somewhere, and if there's a deployment of, I don't know, a satellite or a station somewhere, that, okay, so wireless camera will not be used, will switch off. But it's something which didn't work, because military had the need to be able to deploy really anywhere, anytime, without having first risk of keeping this transmission of wireless camera, for example, or without taking any risk, even to explain that they are deploying in a specific location. So, and that's something which is just for Paris. At the nationwide level, you can imagine the complexity, and at the international level, I don't see any possibility. And that's really the difficulty in all these 3 frequency bands, maybe except this lower 125 megahertz. It's everything, everywhere, and without the possibility to easily coordinate with, I don't know, calling one day in advance, we will deploy here and please switch off this base station, or automatically switch off this base station. There's no real possibility like this. That's why, I mean, it's sharing is nice, and we foster sharing anytime it is possible, but here we don't see the mechanism. And that's a difficulty. And of course, we are all here with interest in 5G, 6G, and interest also, of course, in NATO system. That's clear.
Erica, Stuart, any response?
I think one topic to bear in mind will be the US. So the US is doing a review of 7.1 to 8.4 or parts of that band. Because as we know, the US has made all of the 6 gigahertz, the lower and the upper, available for unlicensed. So it will be interesting to see whether what comes out of the US is in line with what NATO think and sharing's not possible, or whether some sort of mixed use sharing arrangement is possible in the US. So I think it will be quite interesting to see what emerges there, whether, and I understand that there may be some differences in deployments in the US compared to outside of the US, but that will be very interesting to see whether sharing in cities is possible. Not everywhere, but in cities. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that's clear that in US they are studying this frequency band 780 GHz and also the 313, 345. It is studied, and the result is for 2026. So it's not because it is under study that they will find some results. I mean, it's also in study in ITU, and I don't think we will find any results. So I'm not sure you can expect too much about these studies, but there's nothing which is completely written in this respect. And next element concerning this issue, whatever is happening in US, which may make a push for certain frequency band, that doesn't mean it would be available in Europe, and that's the difficulty. And the real problem of US is that the upper 6 GHz is not available there because of Wi-Fi. So they are struggling with something which is much more difficult than in Europe, where we have the upper 6 GHz is providing a possibility for 6G. So it's creating also a difficulty in terms of pressure for finding some new spectrum for 6G.
Stuart, please go ahead.
May I? So I want to be really clear. For Europe, it's very clear that the upper 6 gigahertz is the main band for those wideband, high power, quality of service channels, 200 megahertz. That's very clear. But what we're saying is it may be a little premature without a full engagement of the industry and the NATO friends to say no right now. That may be a little bit premature, particularly if there is a benefit to using 5G and 6G for those long-term NATO applications. If we're going to have 5G, 6G NATO applications, you'll need spectrum. Thank you.
So here's the question. Yeah, if we want to have 5G applications, maybe NATO can work together with the industry. And if we're talking about following the US, I feel like we've mentioned it a couple of times now over the past day, and well, yesterday and today, that we actually want to be competitive. We want to be ahead of the curve as well. We don't always want to be following what the States is doing. So is it necessarily the smartest sort of thing to do to say, oh, we know the US is working on it, let's wait and see what they come out with, and potentially it will be applicable to us?
Well, the position as it currently stands is also supported by the US at the moment. So maybe they are working on studies, I don't know, likely. But as already said, the situation in the US, they're in a completely different region with vast areas where there's hardly anybody, whereas the situation in Europe is completely different, which is highly density of populations and all that. So those things will all need to be taken into account. And I mean, sometimes when you see studies, is it truly unbiased? I wonder. Who pays for the studies, you could ask. I mean, I'm not saying that all these studies that they are all biased, all of them are biased, but it's always interesting to know who paid for it.
Fair point. Erica?
Yeah, just to respond a little bit to this. Okay, so first of all, I think that to your point, because I think it was very good, do we need to follow the US or not? And I don't think Europe needs to always follow the US. we can also lead. We actually led in previous generations. So let's remember previous years, and Sweden was actually the first country that had some of the previous years. So that's Europe. We can be before the US. And it's not a discussion, should a country go for the upper 6 or the 7 to 8? It's not one or the other. But Europe is in a position that we didn't take a decision on upper 6, we're still there, so we have the possibility to have licensed full power there. And we also have the possibility to actually enable more use cases in the future if we find solutions to share. So actually, we could be ahead of the US. That's the whole point. And then to the comment on the US, yes, the US is also doing studies. I don't think anybody is paying for it. It's actually driven by NTIA and DoD. So I hope that NATO can actually, trust those studies. They are the ones driving the whole work. It's not the industry. So it's actually via defense. So that's, I think that's also what the Stuart was also trying to refer. I mean, we have to see, is there any sharing possibilities? Of course, there is work in ITUR, there is work in the US. So we actually have the luxury to follow and see later when it goes in the process, is this something that fits Europe or not? Maybe the answer is no, but at this point, we don't know. And just at least as a global technology leader, as Ericsson, we are really working on potential solutions. So we would like to at least to be given the opportunity to just come with innovation.
Gerasimos, well, do you have anything to say on this, Europe as a leader?
I think it's very interesting to listen to this discussion, and of course I have the privilege of being in a position where I'm more driving the procedure and making sure that all these opinions are taken well into account and inform the decision of the council when the decision is taken. But I would like to come back a bit to a point that is stuck in my mind since I'm hearing the discussions. Availability of spectrum is, of course, a prerequisite to deploy networks, but it's not in itself sufficient. It's also what matters also is on what conditions you have the spectrum and whether the cost of deploying the network is such as to allow networks to be deployed. We may have today more spectrum available for 5G than other parts of the world, but we don't have better networks necessarily, at least not in all Europe, than other parts of the world. And we have to look very carefully this part, and not only the part on the availability of spectrum. And I mean, all this we have launched the discussion with our white paper last year, and we have launched now our 3 studies in the context of the Digital Network Act. And I think we need to see, and we need to make sure, in order to have 5G and 6G networks, that the industry can deploy in a cost-efficient manner, and that the use cases, the services that are provided are, let's say, services which the end users will be willing to pay for it and to pay for the networks. For the rest, I'm sure that with the process, with an inclusive process, we will find what possibilities there can be to, if possible, to share spectrum without compromising other EU policies, which are very important and which need to be protected, like the Common Security and Defense Policy, or other programs like the Galileo program, the Copernicus program, that are also important for climate change and for other policies. And we should and we will factor this in the discussion and in the decision.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
It was just a kind of response to a question from Stuart concerning the fact that military are loving 4G, are loving 5G, and they will love 6G, certainly. But if I take the example of France, they are using for this kind of operations the 2.3 gigahertz, which is harmonized for 4G, so it's a nice frequency band. And the main use of military was in this frequency band telemetry, aeronautical telemetry, terrestrial telemetry, with a nice possibility of coordination. So then, yes, the sharing was possible in this frequency band. But when you have something which can be really deployed anywhere, anytime, then there's a kind of limit in the capacity of sharing, including within the defense. They cannot coordinate between themselves for something like this. You cannot shut down a 5G networks and in something which is really at any time possible. It's just disruptive. Thank you.
All right, so still very much divided on the topic. At this point, are there any questions in the audience? Yes, over here, right at the front.
Thank you for this interesting debate. I wanted to ask the industry, what could the network slicing do in this subject? I would like to know if the network slicing would serve for something in this problem.
Okay, I'll try to answer. Well, yes, of course, network slicing could help, but that would mean that that in that case, you will be merging the mobile networks and the military networks. So if we want to have everything, integrated, of course it can be, but I'm not sure how acceptable that could be, but it could be, it is a technical solution.
I see Eric grinning here. Did you want to add something? No, happy with the answer? Okay. All right, I think we had one more question. Yes, in the back and then over here.
Hi, thanks, Andy Gann, Cisco. I think it's an interesting conversation, and I think spectrum sharing actually is something which I agree with Stuart and Eric on. There needs to be more thought given about that. But the thing that concerns me here on this whole picture that I see is where is the kind of spectrum roadmap for the 90% of traffic which is carried indoor today and the technologies that carry that traffic, which isn't 5G. And this isn't just on public networks indoors, private networks indoors, and the ones that you have in your home. There isn't any roadmap from what I see in this conversation for that big picture. And we need to look at the big picture, not just something in a microcosm of what 5G, 6G might deliver. That's my question, is where is the roadmap to take all the technologies into account rather than just what 5G and 6G vendors and operators, potential operators, may want to see?
A wider roadmap. Yes, Eric.
Thank you. There's a lot of discussion like this, and the question is excellent. When we are discussing in RSPG the 6 GHz and all this debate on whether this frequency band should be for Wi-Fi, for 6G, or in a shared mode, or in a split mode, or whatever, and that's just same discussion as we had at the previous session concerning the indoor coverage and what could be done for, say, accommodating the need of consumer which are operating, which are indoor, and there's no clear response on that. There's no clear response. So we just have to recognize that today there's this increase of traffic, and we will not speak about the session between Stefan and William on that. That part of this traffic is indoor, and that's remaining indoor, and there's no magic solution just to change that. And of course, we have to consider what can be done in the future to improve the situation and to take into account this, network of network concept that we will have to face. Having said that, I'm just thinking about this issue of sharing and thinking about the sharing with military. Even in something which is as simple, there's no, confidentiality or whatever between MSCN and Wi-Fi, the outcome of CPT is to say, well, more or less, you would be able to share only if you reduce quite a lot the micro base stations power of MSCN. So it's just showing that sharing, it's nice, but it's not always easy, and it would be even much more complicated for a defense system like the one which are operating in this frequency band.
I'm very much aware we're cutting close to the time. I know there's more discussion to be done here. Dan? Okay, one more question. All right. Yeah, just a brief question over here. Yeah, to the front.
Thanks. My question was about CBRS in the States, and to what degree can we help to build trust across the community? Because clearly there they sort of had particular protections in place. We've now got 4 or 5 years of very good data on it. From the military side, my understanding is the protections for the radar have been reduced because, you know, there's demonstrated that there hasn't been as big a problem as people thought. But also from the mobile side, my understanding is there hasn't been anywhere near as much use of that spectrum, i.e. is it not as helpful and therefore not as valuable to sort of force people to share if there's a big downside for them? I guess I'm just interested in both sides, you know, are we looking at that data? It's obviously a different situation, but particularly in terms of trust between the two sides, are there things we can do to see what's actually happened as opposed to what people are worried about what might happen? Thank you.
Yeah, very rapidly, CBRS, this is a problem with radars which are very powerful and all that. And to protect radar, you have the limitations. I think the maximum EIRP in the CBRS band is something like 48 dBm, so it's very close to what we have in the 3.8. For the 2, it's mainly used for vertical use. So the constraint in CBRS band, I think, is not very compatible with what operators would like, and that's also why they changed the rule, at least in the 345, 355 gigahertz in the United States. But what I want to say is really CBRS with radars is something very different with what we have in the 4 gigahertz, 15 gigahertz, and the 7, 8 gigahertz with the satellite communication. So maybe you will have something like in the 31345, which is one of the frequency bands studied by NTIA, but okay, that's also for 2026, sorry.
Just very briefly, yeah, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, I have the last word. That's good. Okay, so just to connect a little bit also what Eric was saying, I mean, when we talk about sharing on the 7 to 8 and possibilities, I think there are two sides. We need to make sure that there is protection for the militaries, but we also need to make sure that there is actually, you know, that it's usable for mobile networks. That's, I guess, I mean, that's the two dimensions, right? So we don't want to, of course, we know that if you lower the power low enough, then you will most likely not interfere. Then the question is how useful that is. And I think that's what we still need to study. I mean, is there a possibility of sharing with some solution that allows also mobile operators to build these wide area networks that we're talking about, and like Stuart was saying, to deploy in the cities? These are the two dimensions to look at. And just one more thing is that it's very different to compare the upper 6 with the 7 to 8, because when we are talking about sharing in the upper 6, we are talking about two technologies that are already designed. I mean, Wi-Fi has already products out there. The 5G products are also, I mean, 5G is already standardized. When we look at 7 to 8, we're looking at something different. It is a new technology. So that's also a big difference. Now I will be quiet.
All right. I know, Stuart, you were wanting to say something, but I do realize we're running over time, and I'm pretty sure people are probably very aware of this. So if you do have any questions, please do feel free to try and catch them on the way out. If not, I think there's obviously still a lot of debate to be had. Thank you very much for sticking around until the very bitter end. And thank you very much to the panel.